Hey everybody, John with Hardline here on recreation and entertainment. So, a common misconception these days is that recreation and entertainment are actually the same thing. It was a misconception that even I had until a few years back when a professor mentioned to me what the origin of the term recreation actually was. It was shortly after this lecture that I realized that we as a society might actually be getting out of balance in terms of how we split our non-working time between recreation and entertainment. As far as I can tell, this might be something to work on. So, what are they and how are they different? To start, the word recreation has its roots in the Latin word recreare, which means to create again or to renew. In around the 14th century, the word recreation has been adopted in the English language to describe a mental or spiritual consolidation, or to describe the curing of a sick person. In other words, a revitalization or recovery would back then be called a recreation. On the other hand, entertain, which also originates in Latin, means to hold together. The prefix enter, meaning together or among, and the suffix tenere means to hold. The connection is clearer yet when we note that in French, entre means between, and tien means hold. Je tiens would mean I am holding, so entretien holds that same origin. In sum, recreation is something that revitalizes, and entertainment is something that holds. Historically and in modern times, it is something that holds attention, usually of an audience. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because every year it seems that entertainment steps in to take the place of recreation. Now, if the two activities really were the same, then this would not be a problem. However, they could not be more different. Now, I know what you're thinking. Many of you might say, of course they're different. Who would ever mix them up? And others might believe that despite the tidbits of language history, these pretty well do mean the same thing. Instead of arguing, here's an example of two ways to spend an afternoon. You could watch a movie, or you could go for a bike ride through the park and around town. I doubt that anyone would ever claim that the movie is recreation and the bike ride is entertainment. Even if we're not conscious of the distinction, we are aware of it on some level. The rule might even be as simple as recreation is when you do something, and entertainment is where you see or hear something. When we look at the two activities, the main difference is the amount of effort and engagement required. To watch a movie, all you really need to do is turn it on. You could fall asleep in the middle, and it will keep playing. Meanwhile, riding the bike through the park takes constant engagement, both physical and mental. Stop paying attention to where you're going, and you will fall down, hit something, or get lost. Physically, if you stop pedaling, the ride will stop. Going down a hill might be the exception, but it will usually take more effort than usual on the attention side. So why is this actually important? It's because recreation is generally exercise for both your body and mind. With entertainment, maybe in some cases you can work your mind, but there isn't actually a need for entertainment to be entertaining. I'm no psychologist, nor am I a physician, but I've done enough research to know that crossword puzzles can help fend off Alzheimer's disease. It's no stretch of the imagination to extrapolate that the mind then needs some kind of exercise. In a lot of ways, entertainment is to recreation as a massage is to exercise. It feels good, but outside of a few special circumstances, it's almost entirely unnecessary to stay in good health. So, if there was no reason to have entertainment, why would we have it? There are a few reasons. First, our sweet tooth for entertainment might have evolved into us to help facilitate learning. People are social, and people kind is much older than rules and social customs. Back in the day, speaking and behaving in a way that was entertaining might have been how people taught important life skills. At the same time, people who enjoyed being entertained would have been the ones to learn those skills and survive. If we consider that archaeologists are pretty sure that we've lived in groups for millions of years, that's a good while to have spent developing the taste. We might consider people's trust in entertainers a bit of evidence for this theory. Today, people who pretend on television and in movies for a living are often some of the most respected figures, even though their profession is essentially a benevolent version of lying. Before the invention of plays, films, and television, the people who entertained would have been teachers, spiritual leaders, and politicians, not necessarily professionals. It would have, of course, followed suit that they were respected in their communities. So, of course, entertainment is probably a good thing in the right places. I'm just trying to imagine a teacher getting in trouble for being animated and telling the occasional joke. Seems like the kind of thing that would only belong in a dark sci-fi show. In a further defense of entertainment, again, because I'm trying to shoot for balance, not banning movies or something along those lines, I'm pretty sure that almost all entertainment indeed has the possibility to teach. One of the best examples that comes to mind right away is the hit TV show The Walking Dead. It was fairly popular a few years ago despite having a lot of what most would consider disturbing content. Now, despite that the show was for the most part a horror or thriller, the series was packed with moral discussions and tough battles not just over who would win or lose, but who was right or wrong. Before we get too far off what I originally wanted to talk about, let's look at what entertainment will not and cannot do. It cannot hone skills, nor can it build confidence. Now, I've talked about confidence in another video, Are We Living in Hard Times, as well as 7 Reasons Everyone Should Be Outdoorsy, and where it sits on the hierarchy of human needs, which I covered in Maslow's hierarchy, is as a very important phase in development. Now, when we look at recreation, depending on how we do it, it can develop confidence, hone skills, and it often, by necessity, involves learning. Not in the same volume when it comes to learning as reading or even watching an educational video, but the lessons learned through recreation can sometimes be impossible to find without it. Just to tell a little story, one of my favorite hobbies is something called dual sport motorcycling. It sounds fancy, but it's basically just riding a dirt bike on the trails as well as on the street, usually over long distance for stretches. As a side note, it's actually really cheap to do if you're employed. A bike can cost as little as a couple $1,000s, and you can almost always sell it for as much or more than you bought it for if you do maintenance, and insurance, parts, and gas are pretty cheap as well. In the hobby of dual sport biking, there are several important skills: maintenance, safe street riding, trip planning, and off-road riding. A couple of years ago, I went on a trip from Edmonton, my hometown in Canada, to about an hour and a half west of a city that was about 3 hours south of Edmonton to meet some co-workers in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains to do some trail riding for the weekend. It took about 5 hours of travel each way, and we spent 2 nights in the woods. Just to recap how cheap bikes are, I only spent about $40 on gas that whole weekend, even though there were at least 7 hours spent riding in the hills. On this trip, I got a bunch of exercise, relaxed in good company in some light wilderness, and built some confidence. I learned 2 big lessons. The first was that the oldest in the group, who was easily about 40, could ride like I wouldn't have believed. The second was that prolonged stress actually leaves you kind of shell-shocked and a little dizzy. It was the longest I'd ever ridden on the highway, and instead of saddlebags, I wore a full-sized camping backpack with all of my gear and supplies in it. Riding a bike on the highway is a lot more stressful than driving a car. And rather than going away, it just kind of accumulates over time. I would actually get off the bike for breaks and feel a little lightheaded and sort of dazed from the prolonged stress, something I neither expected nor had ever really heard of. Stress for me has usually come in short bursts, and if it's been prolonged, it's never really compared to passing semi-trucks at 80 miles an hour sitting on a little steel horse. By the end of the trip, I had some good memories, as well as some frightening ones. By the time I got home, I was tired and sore, despite that the trip was planned for pure recreation. I felt that I had accomplished something as well. So why is all this important? Well, we're moving towards a world of entertainment taking precedence over recreation. This is a problem, not only because entertainment media is more often than not antithetic to something like training or education, but because no matter how many shows or movies are watched, they will almost always leave the viewer feeling hungry, if not unsatisfied. The rare exception would be when a movie is of the caliber that we would call it a piece of art, but its value only exists in that we can apply it to our lives. Say a movie changes your perspective on some issue, this is valuable, but without the issue existing in the first place, there would be nothing about which to have your perspective changed. When we take this to the extreme that it appears to be reaching today, we're left with a self-reinforcing cycle, much like an addiction, where the symptom of over-entertainment is a feeling of emptiness complemented by the sensation that only more entertainment will fill the void. However, the decision to choose entertainment over work or recreation is what causes the void to exist in the first place. In terms of how we solve the problem, I don't think preaching to people will ever work. Faced with several options in terms of how we spend our time, we overwhelmingly choose the option which is a combination of available and apparently valuable. In other words, even when we know that time could be spent better, it's often tricky to actually decide how to spend it. It's today much easier to reach for one option dangling visibly within reach, rather than others which are neither as clear nor as accessible. So, what do I think we should do about it then? Well, the first step, and this is one that I've talked about in several other videos, is to start up a new kind of social network. I have a video on this titled "It's Time for a New Social Network," and it basically provides an outline of the premise and a structure going forward. To make a long talk short, it would essentially operate on a paid subscription revenue model rather than an advertisement-based revenue model. So in other words, the network would sustain itself by people paying to access to it rather than advertisers paying for the network to have people spend their time on it. That, in conjunction with a functional system for sorting posts and ranking them by quality rather than the likelihood of holding one's attention, would, in my opinion, make a world's difference to how we access information. Some elements within a network like Facebook already do this. We have things like clubs and groups who host pages on Facebook, but not a lot of effort is actually put into consolidating these groups, divvying them up by region, or helping the groups collectively communicate with one another to make plans. At the same time, while recommendation features are good at showing people posts that might interest them, it seems fairly rare to actually get notifications about groups and clubs that might be of interest. You actually have to go out of your way looking for those most of the time. Remember, if an agency like Facebook focused on helping people join clubs and leagues where they spent the majority of their social time in person, they would spend less time engaging in activities on the site, and therefore the site would lose eyes that it could rent out to its advertisers. This improved model has already been put to the test with things like dating sites. Well, I expect a general purpose social network would only have a little in common with dating sites. It's clear that the ones using an access-based rather than ad-based revenue model are actually a lot better at what they do, which is in this case to get people who have a common interest connected. In closing, I'm working right now on starting that kind of social network that I just talked about, and I'm hoping it can help to further a few other goals, namely promoting outdoor recreation as a whole and bringing back community civil society. If any of this appeals to you, feel free to watch some other videos or contact me to talk about the project. I'm a history and poli-sci grad, not a programmer, and so I'll need all the help I can get with this. In the meantime, thanks for watching.